The Doors.
Lament for My Cock.
In 1965, at Venice Beach, 22-year-old James Morrison met Raymond Manzarek, the keyboardist of a band called Rick and the Ravens. Manzarek became interested in Morrison's songwriting talent after he sang the opening words of Moonlight Drive. In July 1965, Manzarek invited Morrison to join the band. The lineup at that time included Rick, Jim, Ray Manzarek, Patricia Sullivan, and John Deansmore, who joined later in August 1965. After recording a demo of songs, many of which would appear on later albums, Jim and Rick decided to leave the band due to the poor response of it. The band was then left with Jim Morrison on vocals, Ray Manzarek on organ, Patricia Sullivan on bass, and John Deansmore on drums. Jim suggested changing the band's name, inspired by the book, The Doors of Perception, by Aldous Huxley, so they became known as The Doors. 1 month later, in October, guitarist Robbie Krieger joined the band. In December, Patricia Sullivan left, leaving the lineup that would be kept until 1971. In 1966, The Doors performed at 2 clubs. The London Fog and the Whiskey Go-Go Bar, in which they were discovered by Jack Holzman, the president of Elektra Records. Holzman signed the band to Elektra in August 1966. The band recorded 6 studio albums between 1967 and 1971 before the tragic death of Jim Morrison. After his death, the remaining members recorded 2 more albums before the band split up in 1973. I fell in love with the band after hearing their first album 3 years ago. Since then, I decided to listen to their entire discography. Over the years, my opinion has changed, but for now, I think it's fair. Before I share my ranking, please remember that this is my personal opinion. If you have a different ranking, I would be glad to read it in the comments. Now, I must mention something that might be strange for those familiar with their albums. I won't include their 9th and last studio album, An American Prayer, from 1978, in this ranking. It's an alright album, but it's their only spoken word one, and many of the songs appeared on their previous albums. If you're curious about this album, I recommend giving it a listen in your free time. It's not bad. The band's sound sometimes doesn't fully complement Jim's poetry, but the poetry itself is great and enjoyable to listen to. Alright, now let's move on to the ranking. At number 8 I will put Full Circle, from 1972. The second and last album released after Morrison's death is also the poorest selling one, with only 175,000 copies sold in the US. However, it gave them their biggest hit single since Riders of the Storm, the previous year, The Mosquito. This album deviates from the L.A. Woman style they maintained on their previous album, Other Voices, and incorporates more funk and jazz elements. It begins with what is probably their funkiest song ever recorded, Get Up and Dance. The bass line that opens the song piques my interest, making me wonder how the band would sound if they had attempted a disco song. However, it's probably best that they didn't. While it's a catchy song, the backing vocals by the women trio make it feel less like a Doors song. After the opening track, 4 Billion Souls begins, and I must say it's my favorite post-Morrison song. I really enjoy its tempo and catchiness. It always makes me nod my head. Yes, this song also makes me forget it's a Doors song, but for me, it showcases the talent of the other members. I believe that if they had continued as a new band, they could have achieved some success in the funkier era, creating songs like this. Sadly, the next 3 songs aren't anything special. Vertilak is a boring track that feels too long for my taste, and I'm not fond of Manzarek's attempt to replicate Morrison's vocals with his deep voice. Hardwood Floor has a catchy chorus, but apart from that, there isn't anything interesting about it. Good Rockin' is just a rock and roll cover that doesn't offer much. The second side of the album starts with The Mosquito. It probably has the most nonsensical lyrics they've ever written. And you might initially think the song is stupid due to Krieger's weird vocals. However, as the song picks up speed, it becomes quite enjoyable, especially with all the instruments going wild towards the end. I recommend giving it a listen. Unfortunately, after that, there isn't anything particularly interesting for the remainder of the album until the last track. And the last track is catchy and includes a goofy dialogue in the middle.
Raw fish is very tasty, thank you. Eating raw fish is disgusting.
It's alright, but not the best. The album represents the funkiest sound of the Doors, with some pretty good songs, but sadly not too many of them. Like their first post-Morrison album, it has both memorable and forgettable tracks, but unfortunately, this one leans more towards the forgettable ones. I will rate it 6 out of 10. The next album on our list is Other Voices from 1971. Released just 3 months after Morrison's passing, it is the first album where the remaining band members took up the challenge of continuing to make music without their frontman. Most of the songs on the album were originally planned to be recorded after Jim's return from Paris, but sadly, he never did. With all this material left, the band made the decision to proceed with the album. After 2 months of recording, they released it to a mixed reception and faced criticism for releasing an album so soon after the tragedy. However, it still managed to sell well, with 300,000 copies sold. First track, In the Eye of the Sun, has that psychedelic beginning. It's a good opening track. The Manzarek vocal on it has a vibe similar to Mick Jagger from the Rolling Stones. I'm not sure if others hear it too, so feel free to share your thoughts in the comments. The next song, Variety is the Spice of Life, features a piano sound that reminds me of songs from The Soft Parade. It's also an alright song. However, Ships with Sails has a strange Manzarek vocal that I find really peculiar. Unfortunately, the song becomes quite boring, especially considering its 7-minute length. Tightrope Ride is an alright rock track that I can recommend listening to. After that, a gentle piano appears on Down on the Farm, which doesn't feel like a typical Doors song and instead reminds me more of something that the band, Wings, would later create. However, when the organs come in, it starts to sound more like a regular Doors song, though not an interesting one. Additionally, there are some silly noises in the song that I find unpleasant. I'm not sure what the intention was behind this song, whether it was meant to be a gentle pop song, a typical Doors rock number, or a silly song for laughs. Personally, I don't like it. The next song, I'm Horny, I'm Stoned, is better. I enjoy the rhythm, but besides that, it doesn't offer anything particularly interesting. It's okay. Wandering Musician would have been better placed as the last track on the album. I really enjoy the vocals on it, especially when Krieger and Manzarek sing together. It's a nice track. Hang On to Your Life starts with exotic drums and has an interesting feeling with harmony. It has a bit of an action movie soundtrack style. The song picks up speed around the 3-minute mark, which is probably my favorite moment in the song. It's alright, but in my opinion, the previous track would have worked better as a closer. Comparing this album to their next effort, Full Circle, Other Voices sticks more to the familiar territory of their music, which is why it has more interesting sounding songs. While I appreciate the creativity of Full Circle, Other Voices captures a sound that leaves you wondering how it would have developed if the tragic event didn't happen and Jim had finished the songs. Overall, I would give it a rating of 6.5 out of 10. Now, after the pre-Morrison era, it's time to return to the more well-known albums with the full band. Our first album with Jim Morrison to make the list is The Soft Parade from 1969. Doors had become one of the biggest bands in the US. Their single, Hello, I Love You, reached #1 on the UK charts, and they embarked on tours in both the US and Europe. The recording sessions for the album began in July 1968, but they were not without difficulties due to Jim Morrison's heavy drinking. At one point, he even considered leaving the band, but Ray talked him out of it. In March, Jim was arrested for profanity following an incident at a concert in Miami. Finally, the album was finished and released in July 1969. It received a mixed reception, with many people not liking the more pop-sounding music on the album. It stands as their only album where they incorporated a more commercial sound by adding brass and strings to the music. The album opens with Tell All the People, and right away you can hear the difference in their sound on this album. The opening horns and strings make you forget that you're listening to a Doors song. However, apart from that, I must say it's an enjoyable track with a great vocal performance by Jim Morrison. Following that is their most successful song from this album, Touch Me. I really love this track, from Krieger's iconic guitar riff to Manzarek's celestial playing and the amazing sax solo by Curtis Amy. It's an incredible track and one of my favorites. Shaman Blues brings us back to the more familiar Doors sound, but it's nothing special. Manzarek's harpsichord playing adds a cool touch to it. The next song, Do It, has an interesting chorus and a nice bass line. It's somewhat catchy because of that, but the rest of the song is not particularly memorable. Easy Ride has an interesting, bouncy rhythm that reminds me of the gospel scene in Blues Brothers. After the less compelling, Wild Child, we have a song called, Runnin' Blue, which is probably the strangest song the Doors did with Morrison. It's a combination of R&B and bluegrass sound. I was shocked when I first listened to it and the mandolin and fiddle appeared, with Krieger taking the lead vocals.
Alright, look at my shoes, not quite the walking blues, don't fight so much to lose, can't fight the running blues.
To its weirdness, it has become one of the most memorable songs on the album. I don't know how, but I love this track. Following that unique track, Wishful Sinful, starts, and it's alright. I really appreciate Jim's vocal performance on it, but the song didn't captivate me enough to love it. The last track, self-titled, The Soft Parade, is the longest on the album. It begins with Morrison screaming, "You cannot petition the Lord with prayer!" Then transitions to a slow and gentle harpsichord sound. But soon other instruments join in and the song takes on a funky vibe for a minute before shifting to a music hall style. The congas played by Reinal Andino maintain this sound for the rest of the track. I found the beginning of the song enjoyable, but sadly, the rest of it didn't hold my interest as much. It's an alright song to close the album. Overall, this album is good, but you can sense a slight decline in song quality compared to their 3 previous albums. It has many amazing tracks, but unfortunately, it's the first Doors album that also includes less enjoyable and less interesting moments. Because of this, there aren't many songs that I feel compelled to revisit. I would rate it 7 out of 10. 1 year later, following the failure of the new style experimented with in The Soft Parade, the Doors decided to return to their back-to-basics sound with their next album, which is next on our list, Morrison Hotel. Similar to the previous album, it was still a challenging process due to Jim's struggles with alcohol abuse. Moreover, the infamous Miami incident led to the cancellation of many planned concerts and the band facing bans on radio airplay. However, the recording sessions for the album finally commenced in November. 3 months later, in February 1970, the album was released to excellent reception. Many people considered it the Doors' comeback album, and some even claimed it was their best work to date. The album kicks off with the energetic rock number, Roadhouse Blues, showcasing this album's departure from their previous psychedelic and spooky sound that their first 3 albums had. Although not my favorite Doors rock song, it's still a solid track. The next song, Waiting for the Sun, is a leftover from their 3rd album and brings back that classic psychedelic vibe with slide guitar and organs. You Make Me Real introduces the tack piano, giving it a ragtime feel and successfully capturing an old rock and roll sound. Peace Frog starts with a memorable guitar riff and stands out as a great Doors song, touching on Jim's childhood experience of witnessing a car accident and referencing real-life events like Chicago riots and New Haven incident. The song transitions into Blue Sunday, a slower and beautiful track featuring Jim's gentle vocals. Unfortunately, Ship of Fools and Land Ho become repetitive and lose their appeal over time. The Spy and Queen of the Highway are pleasant but lack the staying power to make them standout tracks. Indian Summer begins with a sound reminiscent of their first albums, The End, making it a nice addition to the album. However, the placement of Maggie M. Gill as the last song feels off. Swapping its position with Indian Summer would have been a better choice. Morrison Hotel contains many amazing songs, and overall, I really love it. However, I find the second side of the album to be less interesting compared to the first side. It is a great Doors record, but it's not without its flaws, as some tracks become repetitive. I would give it an 8 out of 10. After the success of their first 2 albums, it was time for the band to create their 3rd album, which brings us to Waiting for the Sun, from 1968. The recording sessions for the album began 4 months after the release of their 2nd album. This album marked the conclusion of their psychedelic-era trilogy that began with their debut. The band faced the challenging task of following up their previous successes. Unfortunately, Waiting for the Sun received mixed reviews from critics, who saw it as a disappointment after their 2 great albums. Additionally, Morrison had his first incident at a concert in New Haven in December 1967, marking the start of the band's problems. Our first track on the album is their big hit, Hello I Love You. It originated from a 1965 demo they recorded and has a commercial sound that some fans dislike, but I personally enjoy it. While not my favorite Doors song, I appreciate Jim's vocals and Krieger's guitar playing in this track. It's worth noting that the song faced plagiarism allegations due to similarities in the guitar riff with the Kinks' All Day and All of the Night. The next song, Love Street, is much better in my opinion. I love the organ and bass line in the opening, creating a spooky vibe. Jim's vocals are amazing, and there's a sweetness to the song when he starts singing. It's an overall fantastic track. Not to Touch the Earth follows, originally intended as part of a longer song called Celebration of the Lizard for the album's first side. However, the record company didn't approve it. It's another great spooky track that I love, especially when it gets really weird. The famous "Lizard King" line is a highlight as well. The album slows down a bit with "Summer's Almost Gone" and "Wintertime Love," which aren't as interesting. Side 1 concludes with "The Unknown Soldier," a really good track and the band's first anti-war song. It features a unique section that depicts an execution by a firing squad. For a fuller appreciation, I recommend watching the live version from their 1968 performance at the Hollywood Bowl. My Wild Love stands out as it lacks any background instruments. It has an anthem-like quality that reminds me of future songs like Queen's "We Will Rock You." It's an alright track but quite unique. The following two songs, "We Could Be So Good Together" and "Yes the River Knows," aren't particularly interesting, although the latter has a nice piano part played by Manzarek. The album concludes with 5 to 1, one of their hardest songs ever recorded. It's a good rock number, but not my favorite choice for album closer. While this album may not have lived up to the expectations set by their first two releases, it is still a really good album in my opinion. I can understand why it disappointed many people, but I personally love most of the tracks featured here. Even the less exciting songs have certain elements that prevent me from disliking them. Overall, I consider it a truly great album, although not necessarily an amazing one. Therefore, I would rate it 8.5 out of 10. Finally, we have reached the top 3 on our list, and the album in the third spot is Strange Days, from 1967. Following the success of The Doors' first album, it was clear to the band that the next logical step was to create another record. Drawing inspiration from the experimental approach of Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band by the Beatles, they began recording new album in May 1967. The album was then released in September and received a positive reception by critics and fans. The album begins with the amazing track, Strange Days. The haunting opening organs immediately set the tone for the unique and spooky sound of the album. I absolutely love this song and everything about it, from Morrison's echoed vocals to the overall atmosphere. It's a fantastic opening track. Your Lost Little Girl reminds me of the music made by bands like Nirvana. I enjoy this song, although I think it would have been even better if it maintained the vibe it had at the beginning. Love Me 2 Times is a bluesier song written by Robbie Krieger on the same day he wrote Light My Fire. While it's one of the Doors' popular songs, it didn't impress me as much. I like it, but it's not my favorite from the album. Unhappy Girl brings back that spooky organ sound from the first track. I really like it, although not as much as the opener. Next is Horse Latitude, a spoken word track that makes me wonder if this album was intended as a Halloween album, given the spooky nature of most of the songs. Following that eerie track, we have Moonlight Drive. This song is the one where Morrison impressed Manzarek by singing the opening lines at Venice Beach in 1965. It's a good track, but not my favorite from this album. Then comes People Are Strange, which is my favorite song from the album, and perhaps one of my favorite Doors songs of all time. Everything about this song, from Morrison's vocals to the wonderful organ playing and guitar riff, is simply amazing. I absolutely love it. My Eyes Have Seen You is a solid track with its distorted guitar riff. I really enjoy it. After the somewhat boring I Can't See Your Face in My Mind, the last track, When the Music's Over, plays. It serves as an alright closer. I like the distorted guitar riff in the Dance on Fire section and the space vibe synths. But the song doesn't quite reach the greatness of the unique and never boring closing track on their first album. What can I say? This album is truly amazing and serves as a fantastic follow-up to their debut. It maintains that unique and spooky sound that the Doors are known for. If you're looking for something to listen to on Halloween night, Strange Days is definitely worth a try. It captures the eerie atmosphere and provides a captivating musical experience. I'll give it 9 out of 10. The second spot on the list belongs to L.A. Woman, which turned out to be the Doors' final album before the tragic passing of Jim Morrison. Following the Miami incident trial and Morrison's subsequent breakdown during their last performance, the band reunited in December to record this album, their last with the full band. L.A. Woman was released in April 1971, while Morrison was in Paris with his girlfriend, and sadly where he passed away in July. This album continued the blues rock style of their previous release but also incorporated experimentation with sounds, including elements of funk. It was met with positive reception from both fans and critics. The album kicks off with the funky sound of The Changeling, which has a rhythm that shares similarities with future disco songs like Funky Town. While it may not be my favorite track, I still enjoy it. Next up is Love Her Madly, which features an iconic guitar riff and fantastic piano playing by Manzarek. I really like this track, especially Manzarek's short organ solo. Been Down So Long is a bluesy song that reflects Morrison's experiences with arrest and his weariness with the system. His bluesy vocal delivery captures the tiredness and anger effectively, and I really appreciate this track. Following the slower blues track, Cars Hiss by My Window, which provides a break from the heavier songs, the title track, L.A. Woman, begins with distorted guitar and haunting piano sounds reminiscent of the Strange Days album. However, it quickly evolves into a fantastic rock number, one of the best on the album. The catchy tempo, the repetition of Mr. Mojo Rissin, and the overall structure make it a standout track for me. L'America brings back the early Doors sound that I love, and I really enjoy this track as well. Hyacinth House is probably the calmest song on the album, with a pop melody that offers a nice contrast after the heavier tracks. After the nice blues cover of Crawling King Snake, and the catchy The Wasp, Texas Radio and the Big Beat, we reach the final song, Riders on the Storm. This song serves as the last recorded track by all members of the band together. It's an amazing composition with rain sounds, gentle piano and guitar, mysterious vocals, and captivating lyrics about a hitchhiker who is a murderer. I absolutely love this song, and it's a fitting end to the album. Overall, L.A. Woman is nearly as great as the Strange Days album released 4 years earlier, but it has a better flow with a well-arranged mix of harder and gentler tracks. To truly appreciate this album, I recommend listening to it from start to finish. You won't regret it. I give it a rating of 9.5 out of 10. Finally, we have reached the number 1 spot, and it comes as no surprise that it belongs to their debut album, The Doors, released in 1967. After Jack Holzman secured them a record contract with Elektra, the band swiftly recorded their album in August 1966. The quick recording process was possible because many of the songs had already been perfected through live performances at clubs like London Fog and the Whiskey A Go Go. The album was released in January 1967 and was met with tremendous acclaim, propelling them to popularity that would last throughout the band's career. The album kicks off with what I consider to be their best rock track, Break On Through, To the Other Side, featuring the iconic drum opening and Manzarek's organ playing. It sets the mood for the album and is absolutely amazing. The second track, Soul Kitchen, showcases Manzarek's signature organ sound, which is instantly recognizable and synonymous with his musical style. It's an iconic song with a fantastic guitar riff, a great rock track. Following that is the slower tempo, The Crystal Ship, a beautiful song with a melody and Morrison's vocals that would be perfect for a slow dance. It's an amazing song and my favorite among their slower tracks. After a return to their original style with the great 20th Century Fox, they dive into the cover of Alabama song, Whiskey Bar. It was the first Doors song that I fell in love with, a fantastic psychedelic track reminiscent of the Beatles, being for the benefit of Mr. Kite, from Pepper. I adore the carnival-like style in the music, particularly Manzarek's weird organ playing and Morrison's singing. I truly love this song. And then, the most popular song by the band begins, Light My Fire. Now, you might expect me to have a contrary opinion and call it overrated, but no. In my opinion, this song is the best Doors song. It evokes the same feelings in me as my other favorite song, David Bowie's Space Oddity. It pulls me in as if I were watching the greatest movie ever made. It starts with Manzarek's psychedelic organ playing and Jim's mesmerizing vocals. As always, it's great, but then Jim disappears for most of the song, and the best part begins. Manzarek delivers a jaw-dropping organ solo that convinces me he is the greatest keyboard player to have graced our planet. This solo is just so intense. But that's not all. The organ volume subsides, making way for Krieger's sweet guitar solo, which, like the organ solo, intensifies my emotions. Words can't fully describe it. Go listen to the song now if you haven't already. And of course, Deansmore's drums in the background add to the overall experience. This song proves to me that the band isn't just Jim Morrison. They wouldn't be as great without all the members together in one place. When all their talents converge, they create a truly magnificent track. Go listen to it now. After the enjoyable rock cover of Backdoor Man, the solid rock number, I Look at You, and the nice, slower psychedelic track, End of the Night, the final track begins, The End. You might have guessed from my previous comments about the closing track of their album, Strange Days, how much I prefer this song. It's one of my favorite album closers. It starts gently, with Morrison softly singing the lines.
This is the end.
If Soul Kitchen describes the sound of Manzarek, The End describes Jim Morrison's songwriting. It's a masterpiece of poetic expression with different parts. Yes, we must mention the uncomfortable, family murder section of the song, which led to the Whiskey a Go-Go Club firing the band, but I can't imagine the song without it. It's one of the longer songs that I always listen to in its entirety. It's just a great closer for this wonderful album. Well, I'm not sure if I need to say anything more. You now know how much I love this album, and it stands as one of the greatest albums of the 1960s. If you haven't listened to it yet, what are you waiting for? It's a perfect 10 out of 10. While exploring the Doors' discography, two thoughts often cross my mind. Firstly, I wonder what they would have created if the tragic events had not occurred and they were able to release more albums. Bands like Pink Floyd debuted in the same year as the Doors, so it's not difficult to imagine a similar scenario. What if Pink Floyd had disbanded in 1971? Although they had already produced many exceptional albums, we all know that their finest music emerged in 1973. So, what if the Doors had been given more time? Perhaps they would have released more timeless classics, or maybe they would have encountered creative struggles, resulting in a lesser-received album that would have altered public opinion about the band. Unfortunately, we will never know, but perhaps it is for the better. Instead of pondering what could have been, let us appreciate and fully immerse ourselves in the remarkable music they did create. Thank you for joining me on this journey, and until next time, keep listening.